Hello and welcome to the Reiki Women Podcast. My name is Carrie Varela. I'm with the Reiki Healing Society, and today my lovely colleagues and I are going to be talking about a topic that's trusting the process. So before we get into it, just want to mention we have the lovely Bronwen Logan over here from Reiki with Bronwen, and we have Michaela Daystar with Heartscapes Reiki. And yeah, we wanted to talk about, how do we navigate uncertainty and unknowns, unknown outcomes, um, using the system of Reiki? How do we sit with, not necessarily knowing how things will turn out, but learning how to trust our body, our intuition, and trusting ourselves in the process through a creative cycle, through transformation, and through a stressful event. So I'd love to turn it over to you, Michaela. What do you think about trusting the process? How does that work in your life?
Yeah, this is one of those really broad, juicy topics that can go in so many directions. And partly because it's a phrase that we hear often, right? It's a cliche, trust the process. And there's an idea out there that there are people who are more process people and there are people who are more outcome people, like more focused on the end result and who tend to rush through the process to get to the end. And there's people who, prefer to be in the messy middle of the process and care less about the outcome. And, I think with many things that kind of sets up a duality that is not necessarily useful, because anytime we're endeavoring to do anything or we find ourselves in any kind of experience, there is a process and there's an outcome. And that outcome might be momentary, it might be fleeting, it might be just one step on the journey to the next part of the process. But there's always this kind of cycle of being in the messy middle of some process and then realizing some outcome and then stepping into process again. And so I think we can all really benefit from, at the very least, having an understanding of what our relationship is to those two things. And, how we can be in more healthy, balanced relationship with those aspects of life so that we can make the most of those experiences. I do tend to be a process person. I tend to be less focused on outcomes, which can be really challenging as a business person, trying to set goals and achieve them. But the benefit of that is that I would say in general, I often do trust being in that messy place and not necessarily having to know what the outcome is going to be. Even still, uncertainty is one of the biggest challenges to trusting any particular process, especially when there's high stakes on the other end and where that outcome really matters to us. If we're having a health experience, a health crisis, then on the other side of that process is some outcome of better health, less pain, more wellness, or perhaps the opposite. There can be a lot of pain and fear associated with that uncertainty. And unfortunately, fear does exacerbate physical pain, right? It does exacerbate distraction. It exacerbates mental fuzziness and emotional, fluctuations in ways that don't really serve us. And so just, kind of looking at that landscape of, what is our relationship to process and outcome? And then, of course, in this conversation, how can the system of Reiki support us in being in that good, right relationship? And, for me, I often talk about the way that my Reiki practice helps me feel like there's more room inside of me to be with whatever I'm feeling or experiencing. And in this case, that absolutely applies, right? Because there's more spaciousness, there's more softness, there's more flexibility around uncertainty and around, being inside of a process that, I may have some control over, or I may have very little control over. But either way, it's a journey, it's a liminal space that I need to travel through. And so Reiki has absolutely been incredibly supportive in being able to kind of tolerate more uncertainty than I could before. There certainly gets to be a point where, stress and frustration can come in, of course. But having more of a range of ability to be with uncertainty has absolutely been, has been an outcome of being in the process of being in the system of Reiki. And there are many examples that come to mind, and I'll probably circle back to some of them as we go through. But I'd love to hear, Bronwen, what comes up for you just as an initial set of thoughts when we think about
Mm.
process.
Well, you got my mind thinking. Well, looking at myself here, and I think what happened to my hair today, and the process of the outcome would be that I would have a lovely hairdo every day of my life, right? And the process is that I attempt to model it, do something, get it cut. I don't know, throw product in it, do things to my hair, but it doesn't always come out great. And today I'm not particularly happy with that, but that is just the outcome that it is. And I guess that's sort of, it was interesting what you were saying, like about process and outcome. For me, the outcome is part of the process because I think process is just an ongoing aspect of life, and that we can never really, we can never know exactly what we're going to achieve. We can certainly set ourselves up for success, and I think that could be considered part of a process. Um, I always say, we've talked about this before, if you're doing a Reiki treatment and you start off the Reiki treatment, and what you tell your client prior to that treatment and how you set that client up is going to lead to a certain outcome for that person. And that's going to be largely because of how you set it up. So you're going to make them feel safe, so they can let go. You're going to tell them that you're not going to diagnose or yeah, for me, I'm not going to diagnose so they're not going to at the end go, so, what did you think? Am I going to die or whatever, so it's just I'm setting them up for a situation where they're going to feel relaxed and have a great experience no matter what happens. The process actually of the treatment itself, they might go through a whole bunch of stuff, and it might be weird and it might be even uncomfortable, but if they know that that you've set it up well, then that's going to help them move through that and get to where they need to be at that particular time at the end. So the process continues, which brings me to another thought. The Japanese idea of form and no form. So form is like the process, right? And form is like when we do a practice. And then no form is the reverberations of that practice. And it's like nothing ever ends. We're always doing or sitting in something, and that is our way of being. And yeah, I think knowing that is life, and knowing that there's not like a point. I think we should teach children this, that there's not a point where you get to a point and that's it, because that never really happens. And it's a bit like the princess stories, like, happily ever after. Well, that's not the end, that's the part of, I'm not even going to say it's the beginning, because it's not even that. It is just a part of the whole process of life and experience that we go through. And, we could think of this life as being form. And then when we die, that can be no form. It's the reverberation of us after we die into the rest of everything in whatever way. I don't know what happens after we die, but I know that when we die, we still remain in other people's thoughts and feelings, and the energy of that is continues. Yes. So, yeah, we need to definitely trust the process. We need to know that that it is just this movable thing, that the more that we trust it, the more that we can be, the more that we can relax and actually be a part of life. I wrote an article once called Beginner's Luck, something about beginner's luck anyway. And I really loved this article because it expressed to me, everyone, when they shoot that arrow for the first time and they get the bullseye, and it's like, how did that happen? Like, they haven't done the practice and they're not this or that or whatever. But it's simply because they're not holding on to any of the crap that we hold on to, and they just do it. Yeah. They just allow it to happen without knowing all the terrible things that could happen or go wrong. Or so they're just giving over to it and letting it happen. And for me, that is the perfect process. It's just being in that flow. And I would not be able to do that. Well, I don't do that all the time. I definitely, that is something that I'm working at. But I feel like the support for me in that is the system of Reiki. And we were just saying before this started, I was like, if I didn't have that, I don't know how I would have, what support I would have within myself to be able to let go and relax and know that whatever the process is, that is the process. Whatever is happening, that's what it is, and to just really sit back into that. So without the system of Reiki, I wouldn't have the faith in myself to be able to do that. And that is a true blessing. And I think it comes down to the Reiki precepts, but also the experience of sitting in the practices. And when you sit in a practice and you experience the sitting in the practice, there is a letting go that happens, and because you're letting go into the practice, right? So you're not holding on. If you're holding on, you can't experience the practice. So it's a letting go of yourself to allow whatever needs to happen to happen. And that can be a little frightening. But to know that myself, my wisdom and my compassion that is innate in me, that is always there to support me. Yeah.
I feel like I always learn so much from you, both of you. But as I've been like hearing you guys talk, realize I think I'm an outcome person. I think I'm there. I don't like the process so much. Really positive outcome that I'm hopeful for. Um, a lot of that, I've had to learn how to sit with discomfort. It's just how to sit with the process. And I think some part of the, trusting the process is knowing that the process ultimately is going to teach you what you need to learn in order to achieve your desired outcome. And that's really been my journey with trusting the process. And I think and I love that perspective on the beginner's luck too, because um, I think actually sometimes the first time we do something, it really does set the tone for our experience of something. And then if we shoot a bullseye the first time, more than likely going to be like, oh, I might have some talent here. I might be able to do this well. And so I can, and it encourages you to keep going and keep practicing, and maybe even gives you this innate sense of confidence. But if, the first time you do something, you miss fully, well, you might feel like, I don't have any natural talent here, so I'm not going to, keep trying at something. But really, the reality is that everything we do in, in Reiki, in the world, in our career, and in anything requires us to kind of create a process for ourselves. And I know for my business, I've really developed this process built around the 5 elements in nature and use them through the different stages of any process. And so um recently I taught a Reiki training. So actually last weekend I taught a Reiki course, and this particular one kind of came together. I had one earlier in the year, and then after that Reiki training came and went, had a bunch of people reach out, and there was actually a bunch of people who were interested in the course but couldn't make it work. And so I kind of know the process of delivering a Reiki training at this point is, there's a group of people interested. And when I have a large enough group, I can usually anticipate that one or two or a few are of that group are going to sign up. And then maybe there will be more natural people kind of come together for the course. And that it'll just be who needs to be there. And unfortunately, I feel like in the world of a lot of things is like everything, the actual outcome is so dependent on numbers, which is really the antithesis of the healing work that we're doing within Reiki. Is so much, it's nothing to do with quantitative, it's qualitative. It's really deep into like, how can I really support the people who join and have no preconceived notion of what success is based on numbers. Because if it's just one person and I get to support that person very deeply in the process, then that's a win. That's an outcome that I'm there to achieve. I guess there's one caveat with that is, it's challenging, as a business owner, not always being able to serve people one-to-one and make that work for you financially. But anyways, in this course, like that was just kind of the general process. But there's also these kind of critical moments of tension when it is coming together. And the process of creating something or pulling something together requires you to like really sit in the fire or sit in, particularly maybe like, the challenge of holding space for others, why that might be challenging or not challenging in any given moment. And then going through that whole process all the way through to an integration. And so in the process of trusting the process is trusting that you will learn whatever it is that you need to learn in the process in order to create that desired outcome. And so in the way I've been structuring all of my offerings at the Reiki Healing Society built on this cycle of natures, there's also this integration piece of like coming together after doing something, after completing something, and really sitting with what went well, like how did that work, and how did the process come together, and what did that require of me in order to do that, and how can I really set up my lifestyle or my schedule in particular, like in order to accommodate that. Because sometimes my particular struggle right now is like too many things are like the pressure is on too many things at once. Like there's too many fires in the kitchen, and then you don't have the time or energy, attention to devote yourself to each fire enough in order to really get it to that perfectly cooked state. So that's some of the things that is coming to me as we think about trusting the process. But it's also really, what's nice really actually about that is the joy of completion, and to see to see yourself from the beginning of something all the way through to the end, and seeing how that faith muscle gets stretched, but to see how it comes together and really ultimately like celebrate that, and celebrate the things that you you gain from that experience, even if it came from, being in that discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got a few different like gears going, and I'm trying to like knit them together so that they make a nice coherent statement here. So we'll see how I do. When like you're like, oh, this, but this, but this, but this. Wait, we have to say a thing coherently. So we'll see how we go. But there's a couple of pieces that stood out, threads that I'm pulling on. I think Carrie, you mentioned intuition in your introduction or at some point, and discomfort. And those two things really stood out when I think about process. Like, because where we are in a given process, and then as you said, Bronwen, like any given outcome is really just part of the larger process of living our life, right? So that, whatever like moment of kind of hitting the mountain peak of some outcome, is just going to reveal the next part of the journey, right? Which is actually a really valuable thing to just like, we could spend a lot of time in our practice just accepting that, right? That like that there isn't a happily ever after, right? Like you will have happiness and you'll feel like, outcome achieved. And then like, and here's some troubles that I get to now walk through as the next part of this process. And so there's going to be discomfort inside of that. But being in relationship with where am I in a given process can be really important because it can help us be conscious of the decisions that we make. Because, sometimes we can talk about, trusting the process as if we're just completely submitting to something that we have no control over. And, letting go and holding outcomes loosely and being unattached to, specific outcomes and specific choices is absolutely important. And being in collaboration with the process that we're in is also important. Because when we're not, we can fall into despair, we can fall into apathy, we can fall into feeling that we're a victim and we're just being subjected to by all of these processes that we have no control over, and I can't do anything about it, right? And so finding this place of balance between partnering with the process that we're in without trying to excessively control it, because we cannot control the flow of life. Allowing, being able to be in discomfort enough that we can be in the rocky parts of the process, without collapsing in on ourselves is incredibly important. And then being in a relationship with our intuition so that we can have a better sense of kind of how we're moving through that process. And I was, there was an example that was coming up that I'm going to try to make sense of here, but it feels really present when we first started talking about this topic. And that was an experience that I had when I was young, the outcome of which culminated when I was 14, which was a long protracted illness. It was a mysterious illness that revealed itself at a certain point, and then it was about a year and a half or maybe up to 2 years before it was diagnosed. And it was essentially a cyst in my liver. A gallbladder had swollen up to the point where it was interfering with the functioning of the liver and the detoxing system in my body. But for, like I said, almost 2 years, they couldn't diagnose it, and were trying to treat it as hepatitis and like all of these other things that were completely ineffective. And, the outcome of that was I just felt completely subjected to this process that was entirely out of my control. The authorities could not tell me what the problem was. I couldn't do anything to make the problem better. And I was just getting sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. And I missed almost about half of my sophomore year of high school because I was just out. I was just sick. And at a certain point, they did diagnose it correctly and discovered that, there was a simple but dangerous remedy, which was an emergency surgery to remove this thing, which was about this big at that point. And, when I think about, this state of being in this state of feeling like I was being subjected to a process I had no control over, the sickness that we didn't know what it was, versus the process of going into an incredibly dangerous surgery. It's about a 10-hour surgery, immediately, like without much prepping or mental preparation or, even really understanding, what exactly was going to happen to me. But the feeling of empowerment that I had once there was a process that I could understand. Oh, there's a thing that needs to be removed from my body, and they're going to do that. And then there's going to be a long healing process after that. And I remember just the immediate emotional shift of like knowing that there was a direction, like having a point on the compass that I could follow, even though I was following it into the unknown, right? And into a very dangerous situation. I was excited about it. And when I got to the other side of it, I remember it's like, you have core memories, like just these memories that are like foundational to who you are. One of them is waking up from the anesthesia in incredible pain from the surgery, just more pain than I'd ever experienced, but not sick. And I remember the sensation of incredible pain, but not sick. And it felt amazing. It was like this relief, even though it was more pain than I'd ever felt before. And, going into the process of healing from that surgery, felt like being reborn, and it felt like my intuition was telling me how to work with that, and like that the discomfort of that long healing process was totally tolerable because of my mindset about what was happening, versus the illness that was intolerable. I was so depressed. I was so like, just emotionally a wreck because I had no empowerment inside of it, and I didn't know where to go. I was just like floating in this no man's land, right? And so, there's this thing around, and it feels like maybe this is a topic we can dive into in another conversation, but the difference between like a discomfort that is avoidable and the intolerable nature of that versus a necessary pain, right? That we can then be inside of, right? But how do you stay in the no man's land when you don't know the way out yet, right? I didn't have Reiki when I was 14. I didn't have anything like this. I had late night television, is what I had. I watched more terrible television that year because I couldn't sleep at night. So I was just up all night watching terrible television. No cable, no internet, just bad TV in the middle of the night. Um, I didn't have what felt like an anchoring point, right? And yet I did, right? Because we all have that anchor inside of ourselves. We all are Reiki. We all have a center that we can return to. And there was an intuitive nature to that, right? To like returning to center, even in this no man's land. And then once I had the compass point of like, oh, we know what the problem is, we have a process to fix it. There's an outcome to that process that then is going to require a lot of things from me. It became much, much easier to be in that process, even though it was incredibly painful. So I'm not sure I made any actual points in there, but this is just like the experience that was really front of mind when we talked about process, because it's like just this juxtaposition of these two like interlocked but very different experiences. And so much of that came down to, my own mindset about what was happening to me in that moment. Being sick and being in the surgery were both very dangerous, right? But the way that I related to them, my mindset was so different around both of them. And, again, as an adult with more conscious ability to choose how I enter situations, Reiki is there to help me shift that mindset when I'm feeling that sense of, I don't have control, there's discomfort, I feel constricted, I don't know what the outcome's going to be, I'm confused. What do we have when we're in that moment where we just aren't going to know the outcome for a while, right? Like we just don't have that information yet. How can we stay centered inside of that? And, a practice like this really does wonders for that. Much, much better than terrible late night television.
Michaela, you need to start your own like YouTube channel. I know you have a YouTube channel, but one that's just solely, just one that is solely a storytelling one. Right? Don't you reckon, Carrie? Yeah. So you're good. So yeah, look, I have very little to say. Great story, interesting, and it's true. How do we deal with these things? And I think coming back at the end there towards the word mindset for me is everything. We talk about that all the time, and there were two things that came up for me just throughout all of this, and I don't know if they're relevant, but one was, don't limit yourself, because we tend to limit ourselves all the time. And we think, oh, I can only achieve this or achieve that. Don't worry about that. If we think like that, we will achieve that. Yeah. We need to find a way to let go, like the beginner's luck. Just let go. Just really don't try to limit ourselves. It's exciting not to limit ourselves, I think. And also within that mindset, we often limit ourselves by thinking that we're not good enough and or not something enough. You know what I mean? Like you could fill that word in with whatever. But once again, that's a limitation to ourselves. And these are the things that the system of Reiki helps us with. So moving beyond, yeah, those were just things that came up during people chatting. So that's it.
Yeah, I think that was a really good story, and I think that's a really good point, Bronwen, too. Just not making it personal, not taking it personal, but trusting the process to know that at some point in the process there might be this hot mess moment where it all comes together, and you have to like sit with it, and what's I think for me, what I've been really learning is that my intuition doesn't always give me the clearest answer when I'm, in that hot mess moment, right? And so it's like the moment of really feeling those unique pressures and then pulling myself together, but doing the work so that I can do that in a way that really actually is addressing the root cause. And I just I love that not yeah, I'm losing my train of thought here. But oops, shoot. Can you edit this out?
Trust the process, Carrie. Trust the process.
Yes, Carrie, you got to trust the process of losing the train and then hiking for a while and then jumping a boxcar.
Thank you. Thank you. You helped me find it. It's to believe in yourself from the beginning, too. And to really trust yourself and trust the offering and trust that what you have to offer is exactly this is a beautiful, valuable thing for people, and whether people take it or not. I mean, this is kind of the world of marketing and sales and things like that. It doesn't matter, but it's still that offering was still beautiful, vibrant, alive. And in the health process too, I think like just, we're all not going to get it out of this alive. Just the way it is. And there are moments in our life where our health becomes a key, important part. It reminds us of how important it is. And it's in those moments we do have to sit with the unknown. We do have to sit with not feeling good. And it's great to have the practice of Reiki to work with ourselves in those moments because our mindset is so incredibly important. But it's also this compassion piece to just be able to sit with that discomfort, and maybe sometimes it just doesn't go away because it's there to, it's going to be there until the cyst comes out. It's going to be there. Or like, the pain after a surgery is the pain that's there, but like you can work with that pain because it's going to heal. You're on the other side of a healing process, and that's just like you're in a different phase of that healing process. So I just get how challenging it is, like for somebody who has cancer, for somebody who's dealing with the ultimate unknown of life. Like it's one of the hardest things to sit with. But Reiki helps, humor helps, maybe even a little late night television, but I don't think that even exists anymore because it doesn't. But
it's called Netflix.
Friendship.
Yeah, there's some terrible shows on at 1 a.m. somewhere.
Yeah.
Don't worry, you too can find terrible midnight television.
Well, to all of our lovely listeners, we hope that there are some little gems in there. How are you trusting your process? Do you even know what your process is in the first place? Have you been able to see through your own process in order to create self-trust and self-knowledge in the midst of your creative endeavors? Perhaps you're a Reiki business owner, maybe you have other things on your plate that you just know, and you found a rhythm with the process. So we would love to hear from you about how Reiki supported you in that, how Reiki held you in the process. We just want you to know how much we love you, and thank you so much for being a part of our process, because every week we just come together, we come up with a topic, and then we just talk about it. And there's always something beautiful and wise and insightful that comes out. So thank you so much for listening to our podcast, and we look forward to talking with you on a future episode down the road. Bye.
Bye.